Please welcome Greg Xethalis, Partner and General Counsel at Multicoin Capital.
Good morning, everyone. I want to talk about how we got from the ostrich caucus era, where some folks in DC thought they could kill crypto by forcing it overseas and hoping it would all just go away, to 2025, which has been the most consequential year for crypto policy to date. We'll walk through the eras of crypto regulation, what good policy actually looks like, what we've been doing to push that forward, and why keeping this ecosystem onshore is a matter of US strategic interest, not just venture returns. First, a little about my background. I started working in crypto in 2012 on the first Bitcoin ETF proposal, and over the years, I've written the first financial markets disclosure and risk factors on crypto, had the first meetings at the SEC on crypto, and worked on some of the early crypto trust companies and bit license structures, representing banks, trading platforms, custodians, and funds. Since joining Multicoin in 2021, we've leaned hard into policy, fundraising, legislation, and agency engagement. Not because it's fun, though it is, but because if we get the policy wrong, the total addressable market of our investments falter. I lead our policy functions with a lot of help from our legal team, Dan Leonardo, Jay Stolkin, and Debbie Ferraro, and a lot of buy-in from Kyle and Tushar. Our core belief is simple. Crypto is global and permissionless. It will not go away, even if some jurisdictions are hostile. And the only fully wrong policy outcome is driving the builders, the capital, and the critical infrastructure offshore. But at this moment, the US is working hard to be the crypto capital of the world. Our work is anchored on 3 planks. It starts with a pro-growth framework that protects consumers and investors. To do that, you have to defend the builders first and foremost. That keeps them in the US and centers American commercial norms and values, including the very nearly unique right to privacy. Second, regulation should be focused on intermediaries while protecting non-intermediated modalities like DeFi and self-custody. Finally, we should recognize that mining hash power and proof-of-stake validator weight are a modern strategic reserve in the same way that we accept stablecoins as a geopolitical priority. So a quote, "If you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe." For a few years, I've had the pleasure of teaching students at Duke Law on fintech and blockchain regulation. In class, I use that quote from Carl Sagan as we build up the background knowledge. Now, I'm not going to take us that far back, but it's important to set a foundation to understand why regulating crypto is difficult. And yes, JR confirmed I blew my summit budget on that visual. You can generally think about our crypto-adjacent federal financial regulatory infrastructure as governed by 4 blocks of laws: banking, securities, derivatives, and money laundering regimes. There are additional federal and state tax, consumer, corporate, and commercial laws that are quite relevant. But when we look at the legislation that provides the baseline principles and policy goals, that enables the agencies to promulgate rules and regulations that implement those mandates. And up above, you see those bills. You'll often tie the years as slightly trailing a particular policy imperative, often a direct need or responding to a crisis. And for financial services, those policy goals are largely implemented by addressing specified intermediaries, regulating and deputizing them with oversight and reporting obligations. And this is where things start to get weird for crypto. While there are intermediaries in crypto, such as custodians and trading platforms, they're not required for blockchain systems to operate. And the great struggle for crypto is both how to address intermediaries while getting comfort around systems that function without them. The first guidance from a government entity, FinCEN in 2013, recognized this, but it has been a global struggle to bring policy leaders back to that flexibility. Now, there have been about 4 eras of crypto policy engagement. In each, we sought to talk about what was possible, but we mostly defended against the latest prime concern or tabloid story of the day. Era 1 was the honey badger meets the BSA. Silk Road headlines and Mt. Gox teaching us that unregulated spot markets can blow up quite spectacularly. This era focused on crypto as money and actually saw the aforementioned spot-on guidance from FinCEN, which said that only exchangers and administrators were regulated entities, not users and code developers. Era 2 was when Howey met ICO, the 2017 boom, and an almost theological obsession with the Howey test. We spent more energy debating whether or not something was a security than actually focusing on investor and consumer protections. During this period, the SEC came more squarely into focus and Capitol Hill began engaging. Third is what I like to call, or perhaps don't like to call, the ostrich caucus era. Enforcement first, debanking, and a coordinated attack on developers. For the first time during this period, there was a focus on derivatives with the explosion of BitMEX, or quasi-explosion of BitMEX. And we saw legislators determined to seat greater authority at the CFTC in early market structure proposals. But this period was defined by certain legislators and their preferred regulatory leaders seeking to push the industry offshore, thinking that if you stuck your head in the sand long enough, that it would all just go away. The ostrich caucus, though, it helped galvanize political engagement and directly led us to a 2025 realignment. DC finally pivoted from no to how. And with the elections, we saw immediate change. We have a pro-crypto Congress on both sides of the aisle, and the first truly pro-crypto president made solid appointments of key officials like Bessent at Treasury, Gould at the OCC, Lutnick at Commerce, Atkins at the SEC, and Seelig at the CFTC. Mike had his nomination hearing just yesterday. And they also led the way with David Sachs in the White House directing the workflow. Within days, an EO launched a presidential working group, revoked prior adverse guidance, and reframed the strategy as how do we use this technology to advance American economic leadership. On the regulatory side, Operation Choke Point 2.0 was dismantled and banking guidance was normalized. The SEC stood up a crypto task force inviting into Union Station the very founders and companies that they previously beckoned by subpoena. And the CFTC and SEC launched the Crypto Sprint and Project Crypto respectively. You could feel the Overton window shifting with a focus from a new government on how to implement good rules of the road. So let me pivot from history to principles. What does good crypto policy actually mean? First, it means keeping builders and infrastructure onshore. If the tech is global and permissionless, pushing it offshore doesn't make it disappear. It just means that the consumer protection norms are written somewhere else. Second, it leans into dollar dominance. Stablecoins are basically the greatest dollar export technology we've ever invented. You want those to be safe, well-regulated, and very, very American. As Kyle likes to say, there are 8 billion people in the world, and if asked, 7 billion would probably say they most want dollar access. The Genius Act is how you make that happen. Third, it treats mining and staking like strategic infrastructure. This complements energy and new economy goals and can be accomplished through tax policy. Fourth, you regulate where there are intermediaries, and you don't pretend a smart contract is secretly a broker if you stare at it long enough. And finally, you use the unique features of crypto to fight illicit finance more effectively than we can in opaque legacy systems. Let's talk about DeFi, which together with self-custody is the engine of crypto innovation. Our existing regulatory apparatus is built on that one basic trick we've talked about. Find the intermediaries who sit in the middle of the flows, regulate the daylights out of them, and deputize them as the compliance arm of the state. In DeFi and self-custody, that model breaks. There is no privileged intermediary and often no counterparty itself. The key risks are code exploits, key management, and interface design. So we believe the focus should be regulate the touch points, custodians, fiat ramps, centralized actors. This harkens back to the FinCEN 2013 guidance and follow-up guidance they provided in 2019. And you use blockchain transparency, proof of reserves, on-chain audit trails, and real-time monitoring. These are new tools uniquely enabled by crypto rails. And you build public-private incident response, things like TRM's Beacon Network and the SEAL Alliance. So when something does break, we can detect, contain, and remediate quickly. More importantly, we want founders to feel comfortable explaining to regulators and law enforcement how the systems they designed work. Let us focus on the bad actors instead of handing subpoenas to folks who just develop code. We're also discussing what type of consumer protection should be permissible within limited smart contract administration. Specifically, should security councils be permitted, and in what way can they operate without triggering some limited amount of administration of a system? Let's be clear, these are not easy issues, but we and others are talking about it on a weekly basis in DC. Now, shifting to mining and staking, I want you to think about that type of infrastructure in the same way we think of strategic oil reserves, or we now think of bringing semiconductor fabs back to America. If a large share of hash power or stake weight lives in adversarial or overregulated jurisdictions, those jurisdictions can temporarily acquire at least a theoretical amount of leverage over protocols. That is not acceptable for systems that will become critical financial and commercial infrastructure. We need a plurality of hash rate and stake weight in North America. And so how do we incent parties to set up shop and stake within the US? We need tax and reporting rules that are simple and actually work. Treat rewards as newly created property with clear timing rules and sane information reporting obligations. This is how we win the strategic race against China, and this is also how we have the ability to mitigate organizations like Lazarus in North Korea. And let's be clear, it has the added benefit of promoting growth and US tax revenues and complements our existing AI and energy policy goals. We've seen geopolitical strategy help form good crypto policy. The Genius Act set up a comprehensive regime, high-quality reserves, prudential regulation, and real consumer protection. And that allows this to scale globally. And by it scaling globally, we export dollar power to every wallet 24/7 in a very programmable way. So what do we actually do with these opinions? Naturally, we provide support to our portfolio when issues directly impact them. We'll Sherpa them through the landscape and help them develop policy and regulatory strategy. And there are a lot of our teams, particularly DPINs like Helium and GeoDNet, that are good poster children for public goods enabled by crypto that legislators want to hear about. But we also work to represent the industry as a whole and the companies that we have not yet invested in but might in the future. First, we work the politics. We host fundraisers, support industry PACs, and make sure that the members that are writing the rules have at least some sense of what a block explorer is. We began the core of our political work in 2021, both through trades and through direct engagement. We focused on supporting pro-crypto leaders of both parties. For example, our 2022 fundraiser for Lummis and Gillibrand was the first bipartisan Senate fundraiser in anyone's memory. Hadn't happened. And we've backed key legislators like Chairman Hill, who authored the Clarity Act, and Senator Hagerty, who led the Genius Act, and Senator Hagerty joined us at the summit last year. In 2024, we leaned in with a big push with the Sentinel Action Fund to ensure anti-crypto opponents in the Senate would no longer have the gavel, but we also pushed for a bipartisan crypto caucus with Fairshake. And Kyle leaned in on the presidency by engaging closely during the election and as a member of the Crypto Advisory Council at the White House Crypto Summit this past March. We also do a lot of the boring but crucial stuff: comment letters, red lines on legislation and ETP rulemaking, custody guidance, staking, and DeFi. We've spent a lot of time on regulators walking through the details and countless hours providing feedback to Hill staffers. Most of this is behind the scene, but we've leaned in because we know that good policy pays dividends if we can find Aristotle's golden mean between innovation and protection. Third, we leverage trade associations, public interest groups, and think tanks to align the industry's message around something coherent and responsible. In addition to my board seats with BA and the DeFi Education Foundation, Dan, Jay, and JR lead working groups at the Blockchain Association. And we financially support and roll up the sleeves to help groups like the Solana Policy Institute and Coin Center advance good outcomes. And in doing so, we are able to advocate for our portfolio. And finally, we invest in education and narrative. Things like convening the Fordham Symposium, presentations to Hill staffers and regulators, and a lot of time spent in conference rooms and Zooms. We work to be thought leaders within the legal and policy community and collaborate with peers to craft effective narratives. It's everything from Kyle explaining how stablecoins can project American dollar dominance to Tushar working through the intricacies of deep-end business models to intrigued Hill members. It's demoing DeFi applications and breaking down how tax simplification promotes growth and revenues. And it's working. Heraclitus said to Pantare, everything flows. You never step in the same river twice because the water is always changing. Well, crypto policy is not a gentle stream. It is the mighty, mighty Mississippi after a few storms. Let me try and pull the last 12 months into one place. In Q1, the foundation of what would come was set. I want to highlight the formation of the Crypto Task Force, where we and Jito Labs were the first operating company meeting. 6 weeks later, Kyle joined other industry leaders at the White House for the Crypto Summit. In Q2, we saw the concrete steps to dismantle the regulation by enforcement of the last administration, as well as the opening up of fairer policies on bank and custody access. In Q3, it was big votes on the Hill. Clarity got through the House, and the Genius Act was signed into law. We saw 2 of our core projects get through, with liquid staking token guidance from the SEC and the adoption of generic listing standards for crypto ETPs. And the roadmap that our friends David Sachs and Bo Hines worked on was released in the President's Working Group report. Just halfway through Q4, we've seen 2 key SEC no-action letters that impact our portfolio and operations, as well as the long-awaited Solana ETP. We're now squarely focused on the Senate's companion to the House's Clarity Act, market structure. And this is but a small sample of highlights. As Lenin once said, there are decades where nothing happens and weeks where decades happen. We're on week 47 of the latter. I'd be remiss not to highlight Chairman Atkins' speech on American leadership in the digital financial revolution. It's probably the most important collection of words about crypto since Satoshi or Vitalik wrote white papers. He talked about the need to ensure our regulatory moats do not impede future development and to not allow fear of the future to trap us in the past. This is not saying that everything must go on chain, but instead it's that we must adapt our rules to allow markets and founders to innovate and iterate, and that must happen here in America. I recommend to all of you the 10 minutes that it takes to read that speech. So let me end where we began. The ostrich caucus approach, head in the sand, hope it all goes away. That's the only fully wrong answer. This technology is too valuable, too global, and frankly, too darn inevitable for that. We have to embrace it with good policy, and our job collectively is to make sure that the building happens here, under American norms of disclosure, fairness, and due process. That means policymakers who stay engaged, an industry that brings solutions instead of just complaints, and law enforcement that leverages on-chain transparency instead of fighting it. If we get this right, 2025 won't just be the most consequential year so far. It'll be the year that we decided the river runs through the US, not around it. Thank you.